And welcome back, everybody. Hopefully everybody's back from the metaverse and alt space. I think I may still have a little bit of my VR face on here. But yeah, I'm really excited for this next talk from Antonia Forster. She's going to be talking about how to build a metaverse, which is going to be really exciting with her background and Unity technologies. So Antonia is a senior XR specialist at Unity with a decade of experience in public speaking and several years of experience in software engineering. And at her role at Unity, she works across industries from automotive to construction, helping organizations understand what the metaverse is and how it will impact their workflow. And so she's also a TEDx speaker, a mentor, LGBTQ activist, and passionate advocate for women and marginalized people in technology. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Antonia, to help enlighten us onto how to build the metaverse.
Thank you so much, Ken. I really appreciate that. So hi, everyone. My name is Antonia Forster. I'm the Senior XR Technical Specialist at Unity, and my pronouns are she, her. Now, XR is kind of a contentious term, but you can imagine that it stands for extended reality, and it's just an umbrella term that covers VR, AR, as well as the space in between. Now, the metaverse, as we've seen with other talks today, is a huge topic. So today, I really want to provide a high-level overview of some of the tools in the toolbox, as well as some levity and some humor. To be honest, quite often when I hear about the metaverse, it's from billionaires in suits who present it as this kind of futuristic concept. That's particularly true in industry. I have much more of a focus on industrial applications. Sometimes it's presented in kind of a dry and soulless way. Despite looking serious, the underlying content can actually be kind of silly or unhelpful. Because while talking about vision and strategy is completely valid, if you don't specify what you actually mean by metaverse, or you only show content that's wildly unrealistic without clarifying that, then the audience might be misled or not receive any clear information on what's possible now or how they can get started. So today I wanted to do the opposite. I've got a talk that looks a little bit silly in style, but is quite serious in terms of content. And by the end of the talk, I hope you'll leave with a clearer understanding of some of the fundamentals around the metaverse. So who am I to tell you about this subject? Well, I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I do have some relevant experience. In my role at Unity, I spend all day pushing the boundaries of immersive technology. Now, while I do work at Unity, I am very much here today with my individual Antonia hat on rather than my Unity hat on. So actually, I'm not going to be talking about software solutions today at all, even though Unity obviously offers an enormous range of them. And that's partly because I couldn't help going into enormous detail, and I couldn't possibly do that in the time I've got. But you can always follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn or ping me if you're interested in hearing more about that. And I'll give you those links at the end of the talk. Anything I say today, by the way, are my thoughts and not Unity's. I'm completely self-taught. I don't have a computer science degree. I never went to a code bootcamp. I just learned with YouTube. So I'm very passionate about helping other people, particularly women and queer people from non-traditional backgrounds, start their careers in tech. I do lots of work along those lines. So for that reason, I've been shortlisted for a few awards. And last year, I created the world's first LGBTQ+ virtual reality museum to platform underrepresented queer personal history. I also have some very nerdy hobbies like live action roleplay and cyberpunk themed mixed reality games, and they all revolve around blending the real and the fictional world. So in that sense, through both my work, my activism, and my hobbies, the metaverse really lies at the intersection of what I'm about. So hopefully this is what we'll learn today. First of all, let's distinguish fact from fiction. Why is there so much disagreement about what the metaverse is? Secondly, if it doesn't actually exist yet, how can we define it? Maybe it does exist, like many things, along a spectrum. I consulted with a few experts and a lot of developers on Twitter, and I identified some of the traits or features that it might have. And finally, how can you build it? Since the tech evolves faster than I can write this talk, I'm just going to present a small subset of essential hardware, and in particular, ask the question, how can you choose the right tool for you? what's available, and how can you use that to make an impactful experience. So first of all, what even is the metaverse? Well, that very much depends on who you ask. There's a lot of confusion in both the public sphere and in many industries outside of tech around what the term actually means. And that's not surprising at all, because everyone uses the word differently. This table, I think, sums it up well. Many different and distinct technologies, hardware, software, and infrastructure is conflated under this one giant umbrella term, as well as plenty of things that aren't necessarily relevant. Now, this is actually a huge problem for two reasons. First of all, jargon, even when it's used properly, is exclusionary. It disproportionately affects marginalized people who are already made to feel as if they don't belong. But in tech and in programming, just like in scientific research or medicine, sometimes we need technical terms because we have to be specific about what we're talking about, because errors can be costly. So jargon can be useful if it disambiguates, even among one small group of people. But evidently, in this case, that is not what's happening. If everyone is using the term to mean something different, it increases ambiguity and it's no longer useful. So why does it happen? Partly because if you're describing something that doesn't exist yet, maybe you can't do that by talking about current technology. In that case, maybe metaverse is the best word. But frankly, another reason is hype. If you're a startup looking for funding or a writer that wants a large reach and lots of clicks, then piggybacking on trends and hype makes sense, even if a word is ambiguous or misleading. Now, I don't actually take issue with the word metaverse as long as it's disambiguated. Most writers, to their credit, will dedicate a whole article to explaining it. But I do object to the widespread use of the word without any clear explanation. These are some pictures that my friend Nima Zegami took at CES. On the left, the M word is being used to mean AR or XR, augmented or mixed reality, where you can see the real world with digital content on top. In the middle, the same word is being used to show VR, where you're totally immersed in the virtual world. And then on the right, the same word is being used for another VR experience, but this time instead of being a made-up world, you're in a digital copy of a real physical space, which has been 3D captured, which you could also call a digital twin. If you're confused about which of these is the metaverse, then I don't blame you. Personally, I would say the answer is none of them yet. To make things even more confusing, often when people talk about the metaverse, they'll use images or video of aspirational content rather than demos that exist right now. Things they want to build, visualized with CG. Sometimes these portray things that are misleading because it's beyond what's currently possible. For example, in this video, this is meant to show AR, but AR requires that you view content through a headset or a mobile or some kind of surface to render the digital content on. In the video, none of the audience members are wearing glasses or holding a mobile. So that implies that maybe this is some kind of 3D hologram being viewed from many angles in a gym without extra equipment, which isn't a realistic scenario. In reality, everyone in this video is looking at an empty gym and is acting. In contrast, some of these, I think my GIF is not playing, so I'm going to just quickly switch over to a screen share because I have a lot of moving images in this talk. So hopefully this works out. Let me know if you cannot see. There we go. Just to add to the confusion, some CGI portrayals of the metaverse are framed to seem futuristic, but actually they're not that ambitious and they can be built, or some part of them could be built today with current technology. For example, using hand tracking or gestures to select clothing for your virtual avatar, then putting on a VR headset and being that avatar in a multiplayer space is absolutely something that you can build today. So this blending of fact and fiction sends a confusing message because it isn't clear which parts of these videos are already possible, which might be possible soon, and which are just symbolic or maybe ambitious long-term goals. Also, when most people, pardon me, when most people hear the word metaverse, they think of fiction, which makes sense because that's where the term comes from. Shows or films or books like Snow Crash, The Matrix, Ready Player One, Minority Report, even Black Mirror, are most people's main source of exposure to the ideas and content that are something like the metaverse. But despite the stories being fictional, a lot of the technology or experiences are quite realistic and could be built today, such as these two examples. Although, given that a lot of them are dystopian worlds, maybe the question is whether you'd actually want to. Given that so many people define the metaverse differently and that it's not actually real yet, it's not possible to come up with a perfect definition. So maybe we can identify traits or features. I spoke to some experts and the indie tech community on LinkedIn and Twitter, and I came up with these suggestions. Generally, most people I spoke to agreed that the more features like this that an experience has, the more metaversey it can be said to be, or the more it aligns with people's vision of what the metaverse will be like. For example, multi-user. An experience with one user or two doesn't really match with what most people envision when they use the word metaverse. Instead, something huge like an MMORPG or a multi-user dungeon is a closer fit, even though those experiences have existed for a long time. Ownership, the ability to buy or trade avatars or assets using real or digital currency. That seems to be a key feature for many people. Avatars themselves are another feature. If you're just a voice or you're not represented in any way, again, it doesn't match most people's idea of the metaverse. Multi-purpose, particularly when businesses talk about the metaverse. It's framed as a tool that we could use for work or a series of interconnected spaces with different kinds of experiences. But even within one purely social space, the ability to do lots of different things, like shop for real items or play games, watch a movie, have a dance party, I think is more metaversey than a narrow experience like a game in which you just play table tennis. User-generated content. This is my favorite and I think really important. I think of the metaverse as a bit like the internet, and a key feature of that is that it isn't created by one central authority. Anyone can contribute and create anything they want. So how is the metaverse different to the internet? That is a contentious question, but I think a lot of people believe that the answer is that it will have a spatial element. Whether that's a completely virtual world or augmenting the real one with virtual content, XR gives spatial interaction and 6 degrees of freedom. You can look and move anywhere, rather than just seeing content through a portal or window on a 2D monitor. Also immersive. You can also think of this as multimodal input. The ability to use your voice, hands, eyes, even your brainwaves to control things, rather than being limited to a mouse and keyboard or a touchscreen, is potentially a factor. This obviously crosses over because VR isn't possible without head tracking, but for my purposes today, I've split them like this. Also persistent, the idea that you can make changes to the world, you can leave and come back, and they'll still be there. I wouldn't call any experiences that exist right now the metaverse, because again, like the internet, I think people envision the metaverse as an interconnected series of many experiences and worlds. And ideally, that will be multi-platform. You can swap seamlessly from AR to VR to your laptop to your mobile. So what's the thing that connects these experiences and makes them one singular entity? That would be interoperability. If you could buy an avatar in one game, then use that in any other digital experience made by any other publisher, or you had an inventory or currency that persists across all platforms, I think that is quite close to people's imagining of the metaverse. Here are some other traits that I've seen people identify, but these were a bit more fiercely debated. Multi-vendor. Well, the metaverse as it originated in the novel Snow Crash was actually produced by a single vendor. And obviously, organizations are vying for ownership and mindshare for the public to associate the metaverse, or whatever we end up calling it, with just one organization. But many people do think it will be a multi-vendor experience, certainly in terms of hardware at least. That's why I'm glad to focus on the tools that enable people to build it, no matter the platform. I mentioned digital twins earlier. For most people, especially in enterprise, the idea of having a digital copy of a real thing, whether that's their product or a building or a machine, is a key aspect. It's certainly very useful. Similarly, for many people, the ability to anchor content to the real world is key. Now, interactive is pretty much agreed upon, but it's also very obvious, so I put it here. And presence, again, is generally agreed upon, but is very hard to define, and it's kind of covered already by immersion. And finally, seamless. It feels more like the metaverse to walk through portals or to throw content from one device to another, rather than some kind of laborious process to move yourself or your assets across platforms. So now that we have these traits, we can use them as criteria. We can look at any digital experience and see, would it count as being part of the metaverse? For example, is Neopets the metaverse? Well, sort of. It's multi-user, and it does allow users to trade using virtual currency, but it's not very metaverse-y because it only contains a few of these traits. You don't have an avatar, although your pets do, and you probably wouldn't use it for work or to attend a music event. What about Animal Crossing? How closely does that match what we might experience in the metaverse? Again, it is multi-user and you can buy or trade items. You do have an avatar. Users build a house or island, so it's certainly user-generated and persistent, which is really the key feature. Is it multi-purpose? Well, that's debatable. During the pandemic, I did use the game to have social events, picnics with my friends, and to prototype the design of my living room. And in terms of retail, while you can't buy real items inside the virtual store, there is a brand presence by real organizations. For example, Hellmann's Mayonnaise and KFC have official islands. And on the KFC one, you can meet the Colonel and get a discount code for a real KFC bucket. So does that count? I guess it depends how you define it. As I said, I don't think the metaverse exists yet, but I do think VR chat or Neos VR are probably the closest thing to what people are describing currently. They are multi-user. You have a wide choice of avatars. There are user-generated worlds and avatars which can be created using Unity. It's spatial, it's immersive. You can have full body tracking. In fact, during the pandemic, I learned to do the Charleston using a dance class in VR chat because of full body tracking. It's persistent and it's multi-platform. But is there ownership? Well, that one's hazy. There are virtual markets in VR chat. You can browse assets and avatars and purchase them with real money, but they're essentially a URL and the purchasing is done outside of the game. There isn't a system of in-game currency yet. What it lacks is full interoperability with other experiences. You can create an avatar that can be used in VR chat, as well as, for example, an AR application, but it's very challenging to do. Interoperability is probably the biggest technical challenge in building the metaverse. It's going to require wide multi-organizational collaboration, and I don't think anyone has managed to solve that yet. Now, the metaverse isn't any one of these experiences, but we can use those traits as a scale to measure how closely they approximate what it might feel or look or be like when it exists. It's more a conceptual idea like the internet of interconnected experiences. Personally, I like this attempt at defining it by Tony Parisi. And you can see how this ties into some of the traits from earlier, like platform independence and being user-generated. Neopets is not the internet, but it is part of it. VR chat isn't the metaverse, but it's probably representative of what part of it will feel like. So if those are the features and tools that people identify as being like the metaverse, how do you build them? And importantly, when you have access to so many tools, how do you choose the right one? Broadly, I would say that the tools available fall into three types. First, think about the target platform or the output device. How are your users going to experience the content? This should be driven by who your user is and which devices they have access to. Then consider user data capture or your input devices. In other words, will the content respond to the user and how? What kind of data do you need and which devices will capture that? Two big considerations here are what will actually add to your experience and add to accessibility. Multimodal input will almost certainly make your experience more accessible. Again, start with your audience in mind. And finally, what tools can you use for environmental data capture? I'm not talking about live environmental capture, which is necessary for AR, but more the tools that you could use to make a virtual copy of a real object or environment when you're developing the digital world. First of all, choose your target platform. Well, since there's no official definition of the metaverse, there's no rule that says it has to be experienced on a headset. And in fact, I think that's a rather exclusionary point of view. If you want lots of people to see your content at the same time, like at a trade show, maybe a monitor or a digital display is actually a better fit. You can add interactive elements to normal monitors. Things like hand tracking to enable touchless displays, like on the left, which is a demo I built actually. You can add spatial sound or haptic elements, things that you can feel. You can use normal 2D monitors, or there are many kinds of 3D displays, including holographic ones like the Looking Glass, which give 3D visuals. I say 3D in quotes because you can't walk 360 degrees around the object and still see it. You'd obviously have to rotate the display. VR is a popular option, but it's not a necessity. It will allow you to create a 6 degree of freedom, really vibrant and immersive world. That could be a multi-user social space, It could just be a blank room where someone can design and prototype products. This is VR Rosie, who is a VR artist that uses Tilt Brush to draw and create live artwork. When choosing between tethered PC VR or a standalone headset, think about your requirements. Tethered VR allows higher fidelity graphics, fancier effects, better tracking, and more features. But it requires you or the user to have a powerful PC, and it limits your ability to physically roam and move long distances. Standalone options are often more accessible and slightly cheaper. In VR, whether it's standalone or PC VR, you have no environmental awareness apart from your safety boundary. So it's not a great fit for industrial apps that are used in a dangerous environment or anything outdoors. You can't use a VR headset outdoors because if sunlight goes through the lenses, it gets magnified and burns the screen. So VR headsets are very popular right now in industry for things like remote job site induction and for health and safety training. In other scenarios, AR is the right tool, whether it's on a headset or a mobile device like a phone or tablet. Since smartphones are so widely available, mobile AR is a great choice for gaming, like Pokemon Go, or retail, like the IKEA Place app. AR headsets are more popular in industry at the moment, though, largely because it's safer to be aware of your environment rather than looking at a screen, and also to have your hands free. AR headsets like the HoloLens are very popular in engineering and in construction. You can visualize a building that's midway through construction on top of its site, or you can bring up instructions when you're fixing a piece of machinery. Content on AR headsets will almost always appear semi-transparent, and sometimes they have a fairly restrictive field of view. So VR is a more popular choice for immersive and vibrant content. For a long time, AR headsets were only for enterprise because they were so expensive. But now there are Snap spectacles and other consumer options too. Finally, I want to mention the option of XR, the space between AR and VR. Right now, it's not very common for headsets to offer this, but you can implement AR on a VR headset using pass-through. That means the cameras on the headset film the world around you and show it on the screen so you can see your surroundings. And then, just like a mobile phone, you can render digital content on top. This means it's possible to make an app that starts as AR, then becomes increasingly immersive until it's fully VR, or vice versa. This is a demo of that, developed at Unity, called Unity Slices. The content is anchored to a table, which also gives you haptic and force feedback when you tap buttons on the surface. Now, I want to point out, in this video, there are 3 people using the virtual table, but only 2 of them are in the same room. Those 2 people are using the same physical table, while the third is using their own table in their own house. When we slide into AR, one avatar disappears, so we can see the real person, but the other is still an avatar because they're not physically present, but they still share a common physical space. This personally is, for me, one of the most exciting and metaverse-like demos I've ever seen. That said, while this is a real built demo, it's still sort of a proof of concept for the future, because right now there are hardware limitations. This is implemented on the Quest 2, where the AR view has to be black and white. The Vario XR headset could also be used for something similar. It's likely that moving forward, more and more headsets and XR experiences will offer this kind of flexibility. Oh, gone too far. 1 second. Once you decide how your user will experience sight and sound, another consideration is whether you want to use the sense of touch. This could be as simple as a controller rumbling, or something more complex, like wearable gloves or vests, non-wearables, like an ultrasonic array, which uses constructive interference, or simply lining up content to real objects, like a table, or the user's arm, or a whole apartment. Next, you have to think about which user data or input devices you need. How will your user interact with the world? Grabbing things in VR is intuitive, so hand tracking is useful for that. Or you can add hand tracking to a 2D display to make it touchless, which is hygienic. It also allows limited sign language, which I do see users doing in VR chat, adapted for the position of the camera. Eye tracking allows you to see what the user is focused on, very useful for consumer research or to make content that is adaptive, like implementing visual depth of field, depending on the user's focus. This next example is one of my favorites. It uses hand, head, eye, and mouth tracking. You look at a helicopter to target it, then you stick your tongue out to grab it. Finally, full body tracking. This is very popular in VR chat and Neos VR because of the sense of presence it brings. You can also use biometric sensors to detect nerve activity in the heart or skin, muscles, or brain. And brain-computer interfaces fall under this category. There are many uses for this, including adaptive horror. This is a project called Apex of Fear, which my friend Thomas Takilson is working on. You can make content that is scary, but doesn't actually cause the user distress. And finally, if you want to bring a real object into the digital world, how would you do that? One way is photogrammetry. You can use any camera to take lots of pictures and stitch them together with software into a 3D model. It's slow, but you can get detailed results. LiDAR is much quicker. You can do this with an iPhone or iPad, but it works better on large objects. I'd say larger than a shoe. Finally, volumetric video. This isn't really separate to the others. You can capture this with LiDAR, or you can fake volumetric video by using chroma key, which is essentially a green screen, and adding clever effects. That is a small sample of the tools available to you, but it doesn't mean you should go out and use everything. Start with why. This comes from a TED Talk by Simon Sinek. Don't start by thinking about tools, start with the problem. What are you trying to solve? Who is it for? And why is it needed? Think about how you'll achieve those things. What will that look like? And then how will the tools enable that? Only add the features that serve your why. Otherwise, you may end up building an experience that you feel is futuristic, but doesn't land with your users. This is an example that made an impression on the XR community for the wrong reasons. Walmart created a VR supermarket where you can put wine or milk into your shopping cart. But there was criticism around this experience, essentially saying, we're in VR. We could be literally anywhere. What is the point of being in a supermarket? How does that add anything to my experience? If you don't start with your why, you can invite this kind of criticism. So personally, I think a good why to start with is enabling something that isn't possible in real life, or making something that is possible cheaper, easier, and accessible to more people. Teach a class of kids by going to outer space, or train staff about something dangerous, but in a realistic and safe way, like fire safety or emergency responders. Now, while I urge you to focus on a problem you're trying to solve, it doesn't necessarily have to be a problem that you experience. In fact, I think it's better if it isn't. Those of us that work in tech are a privileged subset of people. Spend time in other communities, especially those who are not well represented in technology. Solve problems that others encounter. But don't just parachute in. That is problematic for a number of reasons. Consult with and hire people from marginalized communities. Give everyone the tools to address problems that they encounter. And bear in mind that this tech is prohibitively expensive for a lot of people. If it's not an appropriate tool for the job, don't force it. These are just some examples of tools being used for positive social impact. These technologies don't just allow us to build virtual worlds. We can also augment and change the real world for the better. Thank you so much. I have so much more to say. I had to kind of rush through the end, but if you want to stay in touch or learn more about any of these subjects, I'm very active on Twitter. I'm somewhat active on LinkedIn. If you'd like to find out more about my recent project, which is building the world's first LGBTQ+ VR museum, it has its own website here. And if you want to stay in touch with me, just Google me, add me on any platform you want. I've got some time for questions now, but if you don't feel confident asking your questions in this forum or we don't get time, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you so much.